Hello everybody, welcome back to another session in HPSG. In this video we are going to deal with passive constructions. We all know that active voice and passive voice is a very important topic in all grammars. And we have already seen in Chomsky syntax that there is a transformation called passive transformation. Passive transformation was introduced in 1960s by Chomsky. We will look at passive constructions in HPSG, which is a lexicalist approach. That is, we will not have a passive transformation. We are going to deal with passives in the lexicon itself. Let's look at the different properties of passives first. We all know that active voice and passive voice have the same meaning. That is, there is a close relationship between active voice and passive voice sentences. The semantic roles of the arguments are the same. And if you look at the active voice and its counterpart passive, the subject of the passive corresponds to the object of the active sentence. The thematic role denoted by the subject of the active is referred to by the object of the preposition by in the passive voice, which is optional. And we know that passive voice is possible only with transitive verbs. Hence, intransitive verbs normally do not have passive counterparts. Also, we need to note that valence requirements are the same for active sentences and their counterparts. That is, if a verb has 3 arguments in its active voice, then it will also have the same number of arguments in the passive. Let's begin with understanding the passive form. When we say passive form, the verb is in ed form, which we will refer to it as a passive participle. And if we try to enter all the passive forms in the lexicon along with the active forms, then the lexicon will become huge, which is not desirable. So we need to derive a passive form from active form. That is, passive participle form of a verb should be derived. This is motivated by parsimony, that is, economy conditions. And having a passive rule to derive a passive form from an active form is also psychologically motivated, because any new verb which enters the English lexicon will have a passive form, and an English speaker will immediately form a passive verb for the new verb. So our passive rule shall turn the first NP complement into the subject. Then it should allow the subject either to turn into the object of a PP headed by the preposition by, or it can be omitted altogether. Valence features should not change. Semantics should not change, and there should be appropriate morphological change in the form of the verb, that is, active verb to passive verb. We need all these in our lexical rule. Here is the passive lexical rule. Look at the passive lexical rule. The input is a transitive verb lexeme. One is the verb, which is transitive verb lexeme. What do you mean by transitive verb lexeme? A transitive verb lexeme is one which has second argument in addition to the first one. First one is a specifier. There is a second argument, that is, there is a complement. And a transitive verb lexeme has 3 subtypes: strict transitive verb, ditransitive verb, and preposition transitive verbs. Strict transitive verb will have 1 object, ditransitive verb will have 2 objects, that is 2 NPs as complements, and a preposition transitive verb will have 2 complements, one an NP, another a PP. So the argument structure for the input, there should be subject or the specifier, which has I index, and the rest of the arguments. This is the input. For this input, the output will be passive participle form of the word. So the lexeme, transitive verb lexeme, becomes a word, and it has passive participle form, and the head value will have a form whose value is passive, right? The head feature is not given here, but here we get the head feature, which will have a form feature, and the value of the form feature will be passive. And the argument structure changes. How does it change? The first argument is omitted, or we can say that it is taken to prepositional object position. The prepositional object PP is optionally added, right? A prepositional phrase is optionally added, and the rest of the arguments in the argument structure move up. So whatever is there, whatever arguments we have in A are moved up, and then the first argument in that list becomes the specifier or the subject of the passive sentence. That is, the object in the active counterpart becomes the subject in the passive counterpart, right? So this is your passive lexical rule. So most of the effects of the rule are in the argument structure. What does the rule do? Rule rearranges the elements of argument structure list, and because we have argument relation principle, these rearrangements also affect the values of valence features, right? Valence features will be affected because of the movement, and then it eliminates the first element of the inputs argument structure list, that is, moves up the second argument to the first position, and then and whatever follows the second element in the input also moves up in the list. And the rule adds an optional PP of form by is added to the list to indicate that PP must be headed by the preposition by, right? That's what it means. That is, PP which will have a form by means the preposition which will be used in this prepositional phrase is by. Okay, what are the semantics? What happens to semantics? Semantics will not change. Why will it not change? Look at, we have given the specifier in the input I index that is tagged with the NP object of the preposition by. That is, whatever role which the specifier in the active part is shared with the object of the preposition in the passive counterpart. And then, since the verbal lexeme's object, the first element in the list A, that is, in list A you have the first element, that is your object. So object will have a role. That role will be maybe patient or theme, and that is retained. It only moves up, the argument moves up, but the role is retained. Then what happened to the case? In fact, the lexical rule doesn't mention anything about case. You see the NP without a case. Here you also see another NP without any case. The passive lexical rule does not mention case at all. Then verbal lexemes also do not specify. We have a strict transitive verb here. There are two NPs in the argument structure, but we do not specify any case here, whether something is nominative or object, something is accusative. But what decides case? The case is decided by your case constraint. What does the case constraint say? All non-subject arguments of verbs must be accusative by case constraint. That means if you have two NPs, the first NP is the subject, the rest become objects, they will carry accusative case. So the first will not carry accusative case. So when you derive a passive form from the strict transitive verb lexeme, the object of in the argument structure becomes the subject, right? And so it will not carry any case. There is no case mentioned in the lexeme, so this will not carry any case, and we do not need to unassign any case here. And automatically, because it is in the subject position, this is not accusative. This will only be nominative by default. Next, we need to look at be verb, because passive is characterized by a be verb with passive participle form of the main verb. So a be verb is added, right? But we do not say be verb is added. Be verb has to have a lexical entry which will have verb phrase of the form past participle as its argument. So what are the properties which we need to look at of be verb? In all the passages, be verb is followed by passive participle form of the verb, and be verb shall take passive participle VP as its argument. The subject of the verb be is same as the subject of the passive participle verb. Because be does not have any semantics, whatever is the subject of the verb be will have to be the same as the subject of the passive participle verb, and be does not add any semantics. Let's now see how this information is given in the lexical entry of the verb be. Here is the lexical entry for be. Be is a be lexeme, and it has its argument structure. In the argument structure, we have the first argument is 1. We are not giving what it is. And the second argument will have a VP, which is a passive participle form. How do we know that? We know that head value of the argument is verb. That means it has to be a verb phrase. And then it has a form of passive participle. And it will also have a specifier 1. Now, that is the VP's specifier and the specifier of the verb be are same. They're tagged, right? So this shows that the subject of the be verb in a passive sentence and the subject of the VP passive participle are one and the same. Then we also look at the semantics. When you look at the semantics, index is 3, restriction is, there is some restriction which we will get it from the VP passive participle. But remember, index 3 is same as index 3 here. That means whatever VP passive participle has semantics will be inherited by the verb be, right? So be belongs to a new type be lexeme. It's a subtype of verb lexeme and takes a VP argument. Headed by a passive participle. The first argument is tagged with the specifier of the VP complement 1, 1. And because B adds nothing to the meaning except the information that the complement's index value is the same as that of B, which ensures that the index is also the index value of the VP B heads. So this guarantees that the semantics of the verb phrase headed by B is identical to the semantics of B's VP complement. So because of the index, we know that the semantics of VP argument and the semantics of B are one and the same, right? So we have seen now how to deal with passives in HPSG. How do we deal with passives in HPSG? We deal with that in the lexicon by writing a passive lexical rule which forms passive participle forms of the main verb, right? This is like our past tense rule, remember, or present tense rule or third person singular rule which we have seen earlier. Similarly, passive lexical rule gets a passive participle of a verb from the transitive verb lexeme. And because there is no change in semantics, there is no change in the argument structure, it doesn't the rule doesn't talk about any semantics, and also it assigns whatever roles are assigned in the active are inherited in the passive form too. We have also seen about the verb be. Be verb in passive sentences takes VP argument, and that VP argument is of the form passive participle, right? And the semantics of be and the VP passive participle are the same, which is indicated by the index of the be verb and the VP argument. See you in the next video.